Hi folks, in this video you'll learn how to build and deploy a responsive portfolio website with animations using React and Next.js. As you saw, we have smooth animations as the page loads in, and we also have cool hover effects such as on the image over here. And if we go down to the skills section and we hover over the different skills, we have a cool highlight effect as we move our cursor. Below this, we have our project section and our projects animate in as we scroll down. And not only that, when we hover over our project, we also have a cool 3D tilt effect. Which we can see when we move our cursor. Scrolling down below, we see that we have a testimonials section with an infinite scroll on our testimonials. And we can also stop the animation by hovering over a card, and we see that the card also zooms in. Below this, we have our experiences section, and we see that the experiences animate in as we scroll down. And lastly, we have a contacts section, which animates in as we reach the bottom of the page. And we also have a cool spotlight effect as we hover our cursor over the contact section. That's not all, because we'll also be learning how to add a dark and light mode switch to our website, and we can see that the website looks great even in light mode. And the best part is that the site will be completely responsive. And obviously we learn how to deploy the site and even add a custom domain so you can show it off to friends and employers. To do this, we'll be using React and Next.js for the foundations of our project. For styling, we'll be using Tailwind CSS. And for silky smooth animations, we'll be using Framer Motion. And everything will be in TypeScript. Now, if you're new to any of these technologies or haven't used them before, don't worry because we'll explain everything step by step. All you need is a basic understanding of how React and JavaScript work. One more thing to mention is that we'll be following a Figma design as we make this project, just how you would if you were working as a front-end engineer in a company. And you can see every aspect of the design shown in the Figma over here. Now, before we begin, if you want to build more cool projects to improve your web dev skills, check out the link down below in the description and the comments to our new Code Complete Labs website, which has loads of interesting front-end challenges like this one. But without much further ado, let's get started. So to get started, I have VS Code open over here, but you can use any code editor or text editor. Now the first thing we'll do is we'll open up the terminal, and you need Node.js installed on your PC. So we'll just write node-v to check that we have Node installed, and we do. If you don't, you can go to the Node.js website and get that set up. Now, since we'll be making a Next.js project, what we can do is write down npx create next app at latest. And this will set up the boilerplate for a Next.js project for us. The first thing it'll ask us is the name of our project, so we'll just say animated-portfolio, but you can name this anything you want. We do want to use TypeScript, but if you want to go with JavaScript, you can go ahead and do that as well. We'll just use ESLint because it's useful. We will be using Tailwind CSS for this project, so yes. We'll just go with the default for this, so we won't use the SRC directly, so no. And we do want to use the app router, so we'll say yes. This is just how the folders and files are arranged inside your Next.js project. And for TurboPack, we'll just say yes because it's a lot faster to use TurboPack when using a Next.js project. And for the import alias, we'll just say no, so we'll use the default for that. So once that command is done running, we'll see we have an animated-portfolio folder, so we'll just cd into animated-portfolio, and we'll also open up the files. And now you need to npm installs to install all the dependencies that Next.js has for your project. So that installs everything that's there inside your package.json. So you can see all the dependencies. There aren't many, like React and Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, stuff like that. There is one thing which we will also need, which is class names. So npm install class names. And what this helps us do is it helps us control our class names a lot better. So if you want to combine multiple class names, or if you want to add some logic on when certain class names are applied to different components, you can use class names. So we'll install that. And before we go further, I'll just show you all of the extensions that I have in my VS Code if you want to use them. They're pretty useful, like for Tailwind CSS or for React. So do check them out. But now that we're done with that, we can do npm run dev to start our project locally. And if we go to localhost 3000, we see that our project is up and running locally. Now, all of the code that you see on this page over here is inside the app folder. If you open page.tsx, this is where all of the code for our application will lie. As you can see, all the markup is over here, but we don't need any of this right now. So let's delete all of this and just write down an h1 that says hello world. And let's delete this import over here for next image. And we see that everything is removed and we just have hello world over here. And now we're ready to get started coding our application. But before I get started coding, I always like to look at the designs of my project. And for doing that, as I mentioned, we'll be using Figma. Now this design, it is available to pro users on Code Complete Labs. But for any assets that we'll be using, I'll include a link to that in the description down below so you can download the assets. But if you do want the designs, you can check out Code Complete Labs and become a pro member and you'll be able to access it. Now, as our reference, we'll be working on the dark mode first. And we'll be working on the mobile views for each section first, and then we'll work on the desktop view. So let's take an overview of the different sections. We have a navbar on top and the school background that we have. This is called the hero section with the text and the image. We have a skills section over here. We have a project section with multiple projects, a testimonial section which will have an infinite scroll from left to right, then a work experience section, and then lastly a contact section. So we'll basically just go from top to bottom, make the background first, then make each section, and as I mentioned, first the mobile view and then the desktop view. So to get started, let's take a look at the text over here. And if we take a look at the inspect properties on the right hand side, we can see that the font being used is Inter. But if we go into layout.tsx, and this basically defines some properties for our entire website, such as the font being used, the description and everything, we see that the font that's being used is this one, Geist Sans and Geist Mono. And we see that it's being imported on the top over here using the local font function. So let's just start by changing the font in our application. So we'll firstly delete these and we'll delete the local font function as well. And then what we'll do is we'll say import Inter from next/font/Google. And this is pre-installed by NextJS, so Inter is available by default in NextJS. And then to apply it, we need to delete the stuff over here from the previous fonts. And we're doing string interpolation, so we'll add the $sign and the brackets, and we'll say Inter dot class name. And then of course we need to initialize Inter. So at the top, we'll say const Inter is equal to Inter. And then we need to specify which subsets we want, and we just want the Latin subset for this font, which is all the English alphabets. And we'll save that, and we see that the font changes a little bit. The other thing we can do is we can change the title and description of our application in the layout.tsx. So right now it says create next app. I'll name this to animated portfolio, but you can name this to your name or anything you want. And then for the description, I'll just say dev portfolio for John Doe, but you can name this anything. The description section isn't visible, but it does help with SEO for your website. So now that's all our layout.tsx work done. Then we'll open up the globals.css file. So we'll search globals.css. And this is basically a CSS file applied to your entire application. Anything you define here, any class name or any variable, it's available throughout the app. And we can see that Tailwind has added some utilities for us, and it's also set up some basic variables, CSS variables over here. So it's added a background and foreground property. And you'll see over here, it has a media and it prefers color scheme dark. And this is basically to help with light mode and dark mode, but we'll be doing it slightly differently. So let's go back to our design and let's click on the desktop dark title over here. And we can see that for dark mode, the background is 030304. And we can see in our code that for the dark theme, the background is 0A, 0A, 0A. So we'll just change that up. So we'll say 030304. And then the foreground should just be FFF, FFF, because we can see that from the text over here. It's just FFF. We'll do the same thing with the light mode. So we'll click on the light desktop. And we'll see that the background is FFF, which is correct. But the foreground, as we can see, is 333. So we'll just say 333, 333. We'll be adding a few more variables. So we'll say dash dash primary. And this will be the color that we are seeing on the box over here. So it will be hash 522 FFE. And even for dark mode, we use the same primary. And then we'll have another special property called dash dash card. And these are any cards that you see over here, like this one over here or this one over here. And for that, we want to have a value of FFF, FFF. And for dark mode, we want to have a value of hash 1D, 1D, 1D. And if you've never worked with CSS variables before, we're just defining these properties in our globals.css. And now throughout our application, whenever we need to use these hex values, instead of using them directly, we can just say the background color will be dash dash background. And it'll automatically detect which theme we're in and use the variable. So that way we don't have to change a bunch of stuff in the entire application. Now I did mention we'll be doing dark mode a bit differently from the way it's done over here. So instead of having this root property and the prefers media scheme, we'll just say dot dark and we'll apply this. And then for the rest of the globals.css, that's everything else is fine. Now to be able to use this dark property, we'll need to make some changes. So now let's take a look at a file called tailwind.config.tss. As the name says, this is some configuration details for your Tailwind in your project. you add any custom properties you want over here or make any setting changes. So as we can see right now, it's just saying that the background is equal to var of background. And to be able to use our primary and card variables we added, we also need to specify primary is var dash dash primary and card is var dash dash card. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry. We'll go over how Tailwind works in just a little bit. But to be able to use dark mode, all we need to specify is a property called dark mode, and we'll just say base that off of a class. And if you go back to our website, we see that currently it's in light mode. And just to be able to see with dark mode, since that's what we'll work on first, we'll just go into layout.tsx, and inside the body, let's add the class dark over here, and we can see that it automatically switches. So later on, we'll be adding a button which controls whether the dark class name is there or not. But for now, we'll just go with this. And the last part of our setup is downloading any assets that we need. So if you don't have access to the Figma file, you can get it from the description down below. But if you do have access to the Figma file, I'll just close everything. And you can just hit Control Shift E and it'll show up all the assets, and you can hit export and it'll download it. And once that's downloaded, just move all of the files to the public folder on the left hand side. And now that we're done with that, we're ready to get started with the first part of the page, which is the navbar. So we can see from the designs that in the mobile view, we have a hamburger menu over here and it opens up. But in desktop view, we have a floating navbar over here on the top. So to get started with that, we'll go into the app folder and we'll say we want to create a new folder called components. And inside that, we'll make the file for our component navbar.tsx. Now I have a VS Code extension which lets me write down tsrafce, and it basically generates a boilerplate for the code, but you can write it down from scratch if you want. Now we won't be taking in any props, so we can just delete that from here. And once we made this, we can go into page.tsx, and instead of having this h1 over here, let me open up the page, we will have a div, and inside that we'll just import the navbar. And as you can see, that's being rendered out right now. Now let's add some class names to the page itself. It's just two classes. So usually if you were using CSS, you would have to make a .css file and then create a class name over there and then add it over here. But the way Tailwind works is that it comes pre-built with a bunch of class names, and all you need to do is use them over here. So if we write down something like relative, it might not make sense, but if you hover over it, you can see that it means position is relative. And that's because it's coming from Tailwind CSS. And the next thing we'll do is we'll also say overflow dash clip, and you can see what that property means. And we'll also give this a value of home. And we're giving it an ID because this will help with scrolling whenever we hit an item in an app bar. Now, if you're new to Tailwind, you won't know any of the classes that it comes with, but the Tailwind documentation is really good. And if you ever want to add any class and you know the property that you want to change, you can find it inside the Tailwind documentation. So I'd highly recommend keeping that open when you're working on a new project. Anyways, back to the code, we'll go back into the navbar.tsx and we will delete the text inside over here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to render out the hamburger menu button. So we'll say create a button, give it a class name of bg-background. And this is where our globals.css comes in. So as you can see, it's applying the property var of dash dash background. And that's because inside our Tailwind config, we said whenever a property of background is used, apply this property. And this is defined inside our globals.css, as you can see over here, and it'll automatically switch based on the theme. So now you understand how the entire theme stuff works and any variables work. So we're saying bg-background, we'll give it a card-shadow. And this is a custom property. This is not defined by Tailwind. So if you want to make a custom class name, all you have to do is go into globals.css, go down to the bottom over here. We'll say at layer components. And inside here, we can define any custom class names and use them throughout our application. So I'll just say .card-shadow, use the apply function and say apply the value shadow dash. And then inside the square brackets, we can put in any custom value we want. Because usually with Tailwind, shadow is usually something like shadow dash sm md lg, but we want a custom shadow. So we'll put a square bracket and we'll put in this value which defines how the shadow is rendered. Let's save that and then go back into the navbar and save that. Of course, you can't see anything because we need to add some markup. I'll also say p of 3, which means padding of 12 pixels on all sides. Again, the base value is 4, so 4 into 3 is 12 pixels. And that's how Tailwind works. We'll say when the viewport is MD, which means when the viewport is of medium size, then this button should be hidden because as we saw in a desktop view, we don't want the button to be visible. So this is how you do responsive design in Tailwind. You firstly define properties you want to see in the narrower screens, and then you use the pseudo selector. So MD is just one of those. You could also do LG, which means min width of 1024 pixels, or SM, which means min width of 640 pixels. And then when the viewport width changes to that width, this property will also be applied. So obviously it's not hidden by default, but once the viewport is wide enough, which is equal to 768 pixels, this button gets hidden. And then we'll apply a property of rounded, which means a 4 pixel border radius, and save that. Now inside this, we want to render an image. So we'll create the image. The src is slash menu underscore icon underscore light dot svg, and this is one of the assets we imported into our public folder, and we'll just say menu icon. Save that, and we see that something is being rendered out over there. We'll add a class name. We'll say that by default rendered it as block, so display block, but use the dark pseudo selector. So in dark mode we want this invisible, so we'll say hidden, and now it's hidden because we are in dark mode. And that's just the magic of Tailwind. It automatically is able to detect if it's dark mode, and you can just use a simple pseudo selector to apply the class. We'll copy it, and instead of having menu icon light, we'll have menu icon dark. And we'll just say that it should be hidden by default, but when it's dark, it should be block. So just the reverse of the other one. And now we have the menu icon. Now we don't want it on the top left, we want it on the top right, and that's where the outside div comes in. So we'll say class name, it should be fixed, top of 12, right of 6, mx of auto, flex, flex dash col, which means it's a column in a flex box. Give it a gap of 2.5, which means 10 pixels. Put it items dash end, and you can always see the properties being defined on the left hand side. And then we'll just say give it a z index of 50. And we see now that it's being rendered out on the top right instead of the top left. So now we're done with the button. Now let's render the actual nav. So we'll go below the button and we'll say add a nav tag. We'll create an unordered list inside it. And for each list item, we will have a div inside it. The first div will just say home. We'll add some class names. So the class name isn't simple for this div. It involves some logic based on the state that we have. So we'll use a function called cn, and that comes from class names. So we'll go to the top and we'll say import cn from class names. Now we can use the function. So we'll say cn, and you can pass in a regular class name string just like this. So you could just say bgred50, and that would be perfectly fine. So let's do that. Let's add some styling that's always visible on this div. So we'll say it'll always be rounded. It will always have a padding of 1. And then since we want to add some logic, we can add a second field, and we can define class names that need to be applied to this based on certain conditions. So we'll say bg-primary and text-white. And right now we'll just say true, so always apply this property, and true. And now you can see it's being applied. If we had said false, it would not be applied. So that's how we can add some logic to our class names very easily. Now, before we continue, let's add some logic to our navbar, because we will be using the navbar to navigate between different elements when we click on a particular nav item. So to do that, what we need to do is we first need to say const active section and set active section, and set that equal to use state. And by default, home will be the active section. And let's go ahead and save that. Now you'll see that NextJS is giving you an error because you imported useState. So how NextJS works is that by default, every component is a server component, which means it gets rendered on the server completely and sent to you. But in cases where you use React hooks like useState or useEffect, it turns into a client component, which means it can only work when it comes to you, the client, and that's when it gets rendered out. So in cases like this, to fix this, all you need to do is go to the top and add the directive use client, and that tells NextJS that this is a client component, and we know that, and it stops giving the error. So now that we're done with that, we'll say use effect, and this will happen whenever we load the page. All we want to do is say set active section and set that to home, because when the page loads, we just want to be at the home at the way at the top. Now, whenever we click on a nav item, we want to be able to scroll to that section. So for doing that, let's make a function scroll to section, and we'll say use callback. And again, this is a React hook. If you don't know how it works, it basically is an optimization when creating a function, but you don't need to worry too much about it. We'll take in a section ID, and that will be of type string. If you're using TypeScript, you need to specify the types. If not, you don't need to. We'll get the section so const section is equal to document dot get element by ID and get the section ID. And if the section exists, section dot scroll into view, and this is a JavaScript DOM function, and say behavior is smooth, and we'll save that. Now to use it, we go to our nav item and we say on click set active section, and we'll say, of course, it should be home. We want to say scroll to section and scroll to a section with the ID of home. And this is where adding the ID to our sections helps. So if you remember in page.tsx, we added an ID. We'll be doing that for each of our sections in our page. And we'll save that. So the scrolling functionality is done. Of course, we can't test it out right now because we don't have any sections. So we'll move on to the next part and we'll test it out later. The next thing we need to do is be able to close and open this menu over here. So to do that, we'll go to the top and we'll say const is open, set is open, and that'll be a use state, and that'll be false by default. And then to use that, we'll say whenever we do on click on an item, set is open to false. But whenever we do it to the button over here, so we say on click, we'll say set is open, take the previous value of is open and say not of that, and save. Now, of course, that won't work right now because we need to add some logic on how to use it. So we'll go to the nav over here and we'll say class name. And again, we'll use the cn function. Now we'll add some properties that will always be needed, like bg-background, card-shadow, p3 rounded, md block. And then we'll say that for the optional values, we'll say opacity of 100 and apply that property when is open is true. Otherwise, opacity of 0, apply that when not of is open. So let's save that. And now we can see that when we click on it, it opens and closes. Now it is a bit abrupt, so we can add some easing to the transition. So we can say duration dash 300 and ease in out. And that basically adds a slight animation to the opacity. And we can see that it works now. And the last thing we need to do is we need to add some logic. So instead of just having true over here for the nav item, whenever the primary background is applied, we'll just say active section is equal to home. And that's pretty much it. So now we just need to add the different items inside our nav. So I'll be copy and pasting, but a little homework for you. Can you create a nav item component which takes in all of these values as a prop and just reuse that instead of copy pasting? So I'll create a new li. And instead of home, this will use skills and change the text to skills as well. Do that again. And this will be projects. Next one is testimonials. And then we have experience. And lastly, we have contact and contact me. And now we see that whenever we click on an item, it closes the navbar, but once we open it, we see that it has been highlighted because the current active section is projects or whatever you've selected. Now we'll add some styling to this list over here. So we'll go back to the UL and we'll say class name. Set that as flex dash call, items to the center. We'll say gap of 4 in each item, text dash LG, and font is normal, which means the font weight is 400. And we see that it looks a lot better now. And it still works as intended. Let's make it work in a wide view. So let's increase the width to this. Let's just close this over here. And if you remember, the way to make something work in a wider viewport width is using the pseudo selectors that we had learned about. So we'll say at MD, say right dash auto, MD left dash 1 by 2, MD negative translate X, and that'll be half. And all this is doing is it's positioning the div of the navbar to the center of the page horizontally. We'll go down, and for the navbar, we already have MD block. What we need to do is that the navbar is currently closed because of is open is false. And we don't want that when we have an MD. So we'll just say MD opacity of 100 for MD. So this is basically saying that when we have a medium viewport width, don't apply the opacity 0 property, even if it is open or closed. Now, obviously, we don't want it to be a column, so we'll go to the UL over here and we'll say MD flex dash row. And now it's a row. And we see that this contact me is looking a bit weird, so we'll just add a property to the contact me div. And we'll just say it is P1, but let's just do white space of no wrap and save. And we can see that over here as well, everything works as expected. Now this should be in the animation section later on, but I'll just do it right now. You'll see that once we change from normal background to background primary, it's a bit abrupt as well. So all we need to do is to each of the class names add in duration of 300 and ease in out. And we just copy that and paste it into each of these. I'll use a VS Code trick for that. So I'll select this and just do Control D, and then I'll just paste it into all of them. And now we can see that when we click on a particular item, it smoothly animates to being highlighted. So that is it for the navbar. In the next section, we'll be working on the top background, which is behind the hero section at the top. So the next section we'll be working on is the background we have in the top over here. I'll be honest, this is one of the most tedious sections in the tutorial, but once it's done, it'll look really cool and everything else is really fun to work on. So we have a bunch of images in the back and a bunch of icons floating around, and we just need to position them properly and add them. So we'll go back into our code, and in our components folder, we'll create a new folder for hero, and we'll create a component inside that called top background.tsx. And then we'll just do tsrafce, and we'll delete the props in this one as well because it's not really required. And then of course we'll go into our page.tsx, and below the navbar we'll show the top background and save. Of course it's text right now, so we'll delete this. And the first thing we want to do is we want to add an empty fragment. If you haven't used this before, it's basically a way to organize code in React, because in a component you can only export a single tag and you can't have multiple tags being exported. So we just use an empty fragment. And this is better than just having a random div. So firstly, let's render out the icons that are rendered out in random places. So we'll say div, give it a class name of absolute, which means we're positioning it absolutely. The width will be full. Max width is 360 pixels, and obviously the square brackets means we're using a custom value. If you were in a desktop view, max width would be screen-lg, which is provided to us by Tailwind. The height is 285 pixels, and in MD the height is 656 pixels. And we're just getting this based off of the element inside our designs. We can see inside top background there's the background icons element, and we can figure out the width and the height from over here. So you can do that for each of the different variations. Let's go back. 656 px, top is 188 px. In MD, top is 11, left is half, minus translate x 1 by 2, MD overflow x hidden, and give it a z index of 10. We'll have another div inside this, give it a class name of w-full, h-full, and relative. And now we are ready to render our first icon. So let's create a div, class name circle-icon, and this is again a custom CSS property. So we'll go into globals.css and we'll say dot circle-icon at apply. And now we can just write down normal Tailwind classes. So flex, items center, justify center, rounded full, w-11, h-11, md, we want it slightly bigger, so w-14, md, h-14, bg of a custom hex value, hash f for ebff, and bg opacity, and we'll make that a custom value of 12%, and then obviously position absolute, and save that. Going back to circle-icon, we'll say top of 0, left of 171 pixels, MD top of 28, MD left of 72. And then inside this, we want to render an image. Now you could use the default image tag from HTML, but Next.js also provides us with an image component. And this is pretty useful because it basically does a lot of image optimizations when rendering your page. So it'll automatically figure out what the size of the image should have been until it loads and stuff like that. So we'll just say image, we'll say src is equal to rocket underscore icon.svg, alt is equal to rocket icon, width is equal to 23, height is equal to 23, and save. And we have to add a forward slash over here. And right now nothing is visible, so we'll just go into page.tsx and we'll just add a temporary div. We'll give it a class name of w-screen and h-screen and save. And now we see that the rocket icon is visible. So let's add all the other icons. So we'll just copy this div. The top will be equal to 162 pixels and the left is minus left of 5. MD is top of 64 and MD is left of 0. This is the bracket underscore icon.svg and let's just say bracket over here. Next one, so we'll copy this again and we'll say that this is the GitHub icon and similarly GitHub underscore icon. And now we need to change the position. So it's top of 60, left of 149 pixels, MD top of 570 pixels, and MD left of 44. Save that. And this should be positive left. Next, we have the electricity icon. So we'll say circle icon. So we'll say electricity icon and similarly electricity icon. Now, this is a special one because it should be hidden in the mobile view, but in MD, it should be circle dash icon and visible. And of course, we only have MD top of 592 pixels and MD left of 608 pixels. And obviously we can't see it in the mobile view, but if we expand, we can see it now. And let me just switch back to the dark mode. So we'll go into layout.tsx and add the dark back again. And then next we have the merge icon. So we'll say merge icon and same for the file name. Again, it's hidden, MD of circle. In MD, it has a top of 158 pixels and a left of 606 pixels. And lastly, we will do the stack icon. So it's hidden by default, MD circle icon. So again, it's not there in the mobile view. We'll put a top of 368 pixels and a left of 965 pixels and say that it's the stack icon. So now we can see that in the desktop view, we can see all of them. And in the mobile view, we can only see a few of them. So now that that's done, below this div, we'll use a normal IMG. See that it's top underscore highlight dot svg and say that the alt is equal to top dark mode background highlight. We'll give it a width of 809 and a height of 877 and say the class name is absolute top dash minus 515 pixels, hidden by default but in dark mode and when it's MD viewport width. So we're chaining a few pseudo selectors, then make it block. So this basically means it'll be hidden by default, but when it's dark mode and the viewport is at least MD, then make it visible. We'll say left of 1 by 2 and minus translate X of half and save. So of course it's not visible in a mobile mode, but it is visible like a small highlight in the desktop mode. We'll do a similar thing for the mobile view. So we'll just copy paste that and say top highlight mobile.svg, top dark mode background highlight for mobile. And the height of this is 429 and the width of this is 465. And then for the class name, we will say top of minus 229 pixels hidden and then dark of block, but dark MD hidden. So of course, only show this when it's dark, but if it's MD, then hide it. Left of half and minus translate X minus half. And we see again that we have a spotlight kind of effect over here. Lastly, we'll add the grid in the back. So we'll need 4 divs for that. Let's make the first one. We'll say class name absolute top 0 width full h dash 795 pixels, bg repeat x, bg dash, and then put a custom URL. And we'll say slash top underscore bg underscore light dot svg, bg dash auto underscore auto. So we're just saying that the width and height of the background is automatic, hidden, but in dark, it is also hidden, but in MD, it is block. And we'll save that. And this is for light mode. So let's just remove the dark property in our layout.tsx and then go back. And if we go to a wide viewport, we can see that the grid is being rendered out. Now let's add the mobile version of that. So we'll just copy this and it'll still be absolute top 0 W dash full. Width will be 600 pixels, BG repeat X, and then this will be top BG underscore mobile underscore light. And then by default, it is hidden in dark mode, but it is hidden in MD as well. And now we can see that we have a grid in mobile view as well. Let's do the same thing with dark mode. So let's just copy these two. And the only difference we need to make is for each of these, let's just say top BG underscore dark and save. And of course, we need to specify when it is visible and hidden. So this one is hidden by default, but on MD and dark, it is block. And the one below this, it is hidden by default. In dark, it is block, but dark and MD, it is hidden and save. So now we have light mode working for mobile view and desktop view. And then if we add back the dark mode, we can see it works in dark mode as well with the highlight. And even in desktop view, it should work. And it works in the desktop view. And now we are basically done with the top background. So we can get started with our first actual section, which is the hero section over here. So to make our hero section, we need to add a few components. So obviously inside the hero folder, we will create hero.tsx and do tsrafce and save that. Now we'll be making a wrapper component which will wrap all of our sections and we'll place that inside page.tsx. So inside our components folder, let's create sections.tsx, tsrafce as always, and save that. And then we'll go into page.tsx. And then above the navbar, we'll just remove this temporary div we had and we'll say sections. And this doesn't take any props, so we can delete the props stuff over here. Now this div should instead be a main tag, and we'll give this a class name. We'll say flex dash call gap, and we have a custom gap of 142 pixels, width full, MD max, W screen large, and padding on top of 236 pixels, MD PT of 60, and MX of auto, so we just center it on the page horizontally. So let's delete this sections text over here and let's import our hero component. Now we'll go to hero. Of course, we don't need the props again, so we'll delete the props. Okay, so since this is a section, we will use a section tag. It's a class name, relative, flex of row, and then let's just do items of center, z index of 20, and mx auto, and let's just do that for now. And let's look at the design and see what we want to make. So we have a bunch of text on the left hand side with a button, and on the right hand side we have this image with a few cards behind it. So let's get started on that. So inside this we'll make a div. We'll say class name flex call gap of 13 pixels, items of center. And this will be the stuff on the left hand side of the page. So let's say h1 class name text dash 2xl, and we want to specify the line weight and we'll make that 1. We'll put text at the center, font semi-bold, and block by default. Inside this we'll add a span. We'll give it a class name of -ml-3. And we're doing this because we have an emoji over here and for some reason it was being rendered with too much to the right, so I had to add this ml, but you might not need it, so you can remove it. And then we'll say space hello, I'm John Doe, I'm a, and this is a way to add a space and make sure it's rendered in the page. And then we'll add another span and we'll say software engineer. And we see now the text is being rendered. Say class name block text dash 27 pixels, so that's a custom font size. We'll apply the highlight class, which is custom, so we haven't made that yet. We'll make that in a bit. And we'll say empty-2. So for the highlight class name, we'll go into globals.css as before. We'll say .highlight, add apply, and we want to say bg-primary, text-white always, px of 5 and rounded of 4 pixels, and save. And now we see that it has a purple box around it. So that's for that text. outside the h1, we'll make a p tag, class name text center, text sm, mx of 6, and over here we'll say I'm obsessed with code and helping startups create unique and helpful products. And then lastly, below the p tag, we have an a tag, and it basically opens up your mailing client to send an email. So we'll say mail to, and you will add your email over here. So I'll say johndoe@example.com, because you want whoever's viewing your page to be able to click this button, open up their mail client, and they'll automatically see a draft of an email being sent to your email. Inside here, let's say let's connect and put an image. src is equal to /arrow underscore right underscore icon dot svg. Alt is equal to arrow right icon. So let's add some class names to this. So let's first do the a tag. Class name is equal to self dash center, bg dash primary, text white, p 2.5, rounded, flex gap 2.5, items center, text sm, and that's pretty much it. So that's what will be visible in the mobile view. Now let's work on the desktop view. So I'll close this file explorer here. So now this is the MD view. So let's first fix this styling, and then we'll add the picture. So for the outermost, we'll just say MD gap of 37 pixels and MD MX of 10. For the second div, which is the left-hand side div, we'll say MD gap of 34 pixels, MD MY, which is the margin on the y-axis of 58 pixels. So 58 pixels of margin on the top and bottom. And then we'll say MD items start. Now for the H1, we'll say MD text dash 40 pixels. So it's a lot larger. MD text dash start and MD of inline. Now for the software engineer text over here, we want to say MD text dash 45 pixels, MD inline, and MD margin on top of 0. That's a lot better. And then for this p tag over here, after the mx of 6, we want to say MD text of 22 pixels, MD text start, and MD mx of 0. So that's bigger as well. And then for this a tag, we want to say MD self start, MD text dash XL, and then a line height of 6. And that's moved to the left. So we have our text in the desktop view. So now below this div, we want to create another div, and this will contain our image. So again, we'll use the next image. We'll say src is equal to profile light purple dot png. Alt is equal to light purple rectangle. Width is 372. Height is 430. And then let's add some class names. It's hidden by default, MD block. Width is 372 pixels. Height is 430 pixels. It is absolutely positioned right of 0, minus z of 10. So the z index is minus 10. And for now, that's pretty much it. And we need to add a forward slash over here. So we see that being rendered over there. We'll need to add everything else for it to be properly visible. So we'll just copy this. And this will be profile dark purple. Let's make this say dark. It's same 372 430, hidden MD block 372 430, absolute right of 0, and minus z of 10. And then lastly, let's add our actual image. So this will be slash profile underscore picture.png. Let's name this John Doe profile picture 357 and 417. Hidden MD block. The width is 357 pixels. Height is 417 pixels. The z is of 10. Let's remove the absolute and the right, and we'll say MR, margin on the right is 7.7 pixels. Margin along the y-axis is 6.5 pixels, and we'll save that. The width isn't 357 pixels, it is min-w-357 pixels. And now we see that everything is being rendered out properly. And let's just view it on a full screen to see what it properly looks like in a desktop view. And as we can see, everything looks correct. It has a maximum width, and we have the text on the left hand side and the image on the right hand side. And let's just take a look at it in light mode. And we see that even in the light mode, it looks correct and it's being rendered out properly. So that is it for the hero section. We'll be adding animations to everything in the end. So for now, let's finish the hero section and get started with the skills section. Now, I just wanted to take a second to introduce you to our new website, codecompletelabs.com. I truly believe that the best way to learn a new language or to improve your current skills is by working on real life projects. On Code Complete Labs, you'll find loads of fun front-end challenges designed to level up your skills. Each challenge comes with a professional Figma design which you can code out in your preferred language or framework. After you're done coding, you can submit your solution on the website and you'll get a score telling you how much your solution matches the actual design. And you can even check out the differences between your solution and the design that was given to you. We're adding new challenges every month, so head over to codecompletelabs.com and start building real-world projects to boost your coding skills today. So we want to work on this skills section next. So as always, inside the components folder, let's create a new skills folder. And inside that, we'll make skills.tsx and skill.tsx. As always, tsrafce. We won't be taking in any props. Save that. And then in skill also we'll do tsrafce. We will be taking props in this, so we'll save this for later. And then inside sections, below hero, we'll just render our skills. So for now, we just see the skills text over here. And in this case, since we'll be rendering out a bunch of data, and if you ever learn a new skill, or if you don't want to put a skill anymore on your site, you want to be able to easily edit it. Instead of having it directly inside your component, you can create a JSON file and then render the data from that inside your component. So that's what we'll be doing. So we'll go to the same level as package.json and we'll create a new folder called data. And then inside that, we'll create a new file called skills.json. And then inside that, we'll add all our data. So I'll just paste it in, but you can stop the video and you can copy all the text inside here. So we have an array, and each array item is an object which contains a name field and an icon field. So we have Java, TypeScript, Kotlin, Golang, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and React.js. So I'll save that. We'll go back into skills.tsx and let's just import it. So we'll say import skills from @/data/skills.json. So we have our data ready. Now let's get started with rendering this stuff out. Before we do that, we want to make some utility components which we'll be using for each of our sections. So in our components folder, let's create a new section folder, and this will contain some helper components. So we'll make a component called section header.tsx, and we'll make another one called section container.tsx. tsrafce. So we will be taking props in this with children. Basically means if you have anything between two tags when you're using this component, that'll be passed in. And the only field we want to take in is ID of type. And what we want to render is a section tag, ID of ID. And if you remember, we're using IDs to be able to scroll throughout the page when we click on the nav item. Class name w-full relative flex justify center and z of 30. And then inside we'll just render any children sent to us. Let's open section header, tsrafce. This also takes in props. It takes in a plain text component of string and a highlight text component of string. Plain text and highlight text. Over here we want an h2. Give it a class name of text of 22 pixels. So firstly, we'll create the section container, give it the ID of skills. And now we can pass any children inside it and it'll automatically get sent. So we'll create a div, class name of section dash contents, mx of 22 pixels, and md mx of 116 pixels. We need to make that again. So we'll go into globals.css and we'll say dot section dash contents at apply with full flex call items center gap of 10 and MD gap of 50 pixels and save. Go back into skills. Inside the section contents, the first child is a section header. The plain text will be the laptop emoji and then this is my, and then the highlight text will be tech stack. And now we see that the header is being rendered out over here because of the section header component that we added. Now let's add the actual div, which will contain all of our skills. So we'll say div, class name, card, and we need to make that as well. So we'll say dot card is at apply bg dash card, and this is because we created the card variable over here. So we can just say background of card, and you can see what that means. Rounded dash lg and card dash shadow. And we made card shadow at the top. So we'll save that. We want to give it a W of full, PX of 33 pixels, PY of 27 pixels, flex wrap, flex call MD flex row, justify center, items center, gap of 19 pixels, and MD gap of 33 pixels. Save that. Of course, nothing is rendered out because we need to go through the skills array that we have and do a map on that. And each item will take the skill and the ID. And we will return the skill component. We'll pass in a few properties. So the key is equal to ID. And this is just what you need to do in React when you add the name, which is skill.name. And we'll pass in the icon, which is skill.icon. Now that this is done, let's go into our skill component and decide how this is rendered. So for the props, we will be taking in two strings, icon type string and name of type string. Let's put icon and name here. We will make an outer div. We'll say class name relative flex gap of 2, p of 2, border primary. We'll give it a border. We'll say rounded 46 pixels. And that's pretty much it for this one. Inside this, we'll add an image. src is equal to the icon that we're getting in. And then for alt, we'll do some string interpolation. We'll say name icon. And then let's add p over here, text-lg, and then just render out the name. And we're done with our, you can see all of our skills being rendered out. So that's the mobile view. And this is the desktop view. And now the only thing that's left is that we have two background images that we need to add. So below this div, we'll create an empty fragment. We'll import next image. The src is equal to slash tech underscore stack underscore grid underscore dark dot svg. Alt is equal to background grid decoration. Width is equal to 569. Height is equal to 373. And class name is equal to hidden by default, but if it's dark and medium width viewport, then block minus z of 10 absolute minus left of 135 pixels and minus top of 39 pixels. Save. And we see that a grid is visible in the desktop mode. We aren't seeing a card outside our skill section, so let's just quickly fix that. And it's because inside our Tailwind config, we put triple dashes here instead of double. So now our card should be visible properly. So let's add the light version of this as well. So we'll go back into skills.tsx and just copy paste this one and remove dark. And then it should be hidden by default. Even in dark, it should be hidden, but MD, it should be block. And then everything else we can keep the same. Let's just change this to minus 125 pixels and the rest remains the same. So let's go to layout.tsx and remove dark. And we see we have a grid even in the light version of our website. So that's it for the skills section of our page. We'll be adding the animations later on, but now we are ready to move on to the project section. So for the project section, we see that we have 4 cards being rendered out in the desktop view. It's a 2x2 grid, but in the mobile view, it's just a single column where they're being rendered out. So now that we know what needs to be rendered, let's go back and code it out. So inside the components folder, we'll create a new projects folder, which will contain projects.tsx as well as a project.tsx for every singular project. Let's do tsraFCE, and then inside projects do the same thing. This won't take in any props, so let's delete that. And then inside sections, let's put projects over here, and we'll import that. Similarly, inside the data, we'll create a new projects.json file and we'll paste in the data. So again, this can be any data related to you. Each item will have a thumbnail, which is a string related to the image in our public folder. It'll have a title, a link, which will have a label as well as a URL, a description of the project, and then a list of icons related to the skills needed for this project. So let's save this and close sections as well. As always, inside projects, we will say section container ID of projects. We'll have a div inside this with a class name of section-contents, mx of 6, and md mx of 64 pixels. Let's add a section header. So section header, plain text, sum of my, and then highlight text, best works, and save that. And if we go down below, we see the heading being rendered over there. Now we can also test out if our navbar is working properly. So if we click on projects, we see it smoothly scrolls down to the project section. If we click on skills, obviously we still have it there. And if we click on home, it goes all the way to the top while scrolling. So we see our navbar is working properly. Let's try it on in the mobile view as well. So mobile view, let's go to projects and it scrolls down, and let's go back to home and it scrolls up. So that's working properly. So below the section header, let's add a div, class name of lgw-full grid. So we're using CSS grid for this one. By default, it has grid calls 1, so 1 column in the grid. But if the page is larger than LG, say grid calls of 2 and then gap of 10 between each item. So this basically means we have 1 column by default, but if it's a wide viewport, we have 2 columns. Inside this, we'll go through the projects and we'll say projects.map. We don't have our projects yet, so we'll go to the top and say import projects from at. And forgive me for not explaining this earlier, but in NextJS, at just basically means the root directory. So it's like a code word for the home of the app. /data/projects.json. For each item, we'll take the project and the ID. And then we'll just return a project component. We'll pass in the key is equal to ID. Thumbnail is equal to project.thumbnail. Title is equal to project.title. Link is equal to project.link. Description is equal to project.description. And lastly, language icons is equal to project.language icons, and save that. Now let's decide how this is rendered inside our project component. So let's declare the props. Thumbnail of type string, title of type string, link of type URL, string and label string. The description is also a string, and language icons is a string array. Let's extract all of these over here. So thumbnail, title, link, description, and language icons. Let's go down below, and now we're just rendering project again and again. So let's add some styling to our outside div. So we'll say class name card flex call items dash stretch width full max width of 428.4 pixels, p of 5, mdp of 18 pixels, gap of 30 pixels. Save that. And we see that it's rendered out as a card. So now let's add all of the items that need to be rendered inside the card. So the first thing is an image from next image. src is equal to thumbnail. Alt is equal to thumbnail for title. Width is equal to 392 for all our images. And height is equal to 230 for all our images. Class name is w-full h-230 pixels. And object-cover. Object-cover basically decides that if the width of the card is getting smaller, the image will just get cropped. And we'll save that. We now see the images of our different projects. Then we'll have a div inside here, say class name, flex dash, call gap of 11 pixels. Inside that we'll have a div. We'll give it a class name, flex justify between item center. The first item is the h3 where we render the title of our project. Class name font dash semi bold, text XL, and MD text dash 22 pixels. After the h3 we have an a tag. The href is equal to link.url and the class name is equal to flex px of 5 pixels, py of 3 pixels, gap of 1, bg, this is a special bg so we'll use a hex value, b9 b9 b9, bg dash opacity, and we'll use a custom value of 24%, rounded, and text of 14 pixels. Of course we aren't rendering anything inside, so let's say span, class name hidden because we don't want the URL's name to be there in a mobile view because it's already pretty cramped, but if it's MD then block. And inside here just render link.label. Below the span we'll have two images. So first img is equal to link underscore arrow.svg and we'll just say link arrow. And for the class name block, but if it is dark then hidden because we have different arrow colors for the two cases. I am using images, but you can use an icon library if you want instead of this. And then we have the dark version, so link arrow dark, and we'll say it is hidden by default, but if it's dark, then block. And now we see we have the buttons being rendered out over here. Let's increase the width a bit, and we see that the text is there if the width is larger than required. So below this div, let's add a p tag, class name line clamp 2. This basically means that the paragraph will go to a maximum of 2 lines, after which it'll show the 3 dots that you usually see. Text SM and MD text dash base. And inside we'll just render the description. And now we see the description being rendered, and if the text is larger than 2 lines, it gets cut out. Lastly, we'll have a div, class name of flex row, gap of 11 pixels. We'll go through the language icons dot map. Each item will be an icon as well as the ID. And we'll name this icon ID. And we'll say render out an img tag, src is equal to icon, alt is equal to language icon, and key is equal to icon ID, and save. And now we see that the skill icons are also being rendered out. So the project cards are being rendered properly. Again, we have like an ellipsis. We have to render in the background like a highlight. So let's do that. Inside projects, we'll go below the last div and say image, next image. src is equal to slash projects underscore highlight dot svg. Alt is equal to background highlight decoration. Width is equal to 558. Height is equal to 558. And class name is equal to absolute hidden MD block. So only show it once the width is at least MD. Left of half, top of half, minus translate X 1/2, minus translate Y of 1/2, and then minus Z of 10. And this is only visible in light mode. So let's go into layout.tsx and remove dark. And let's increase the width. And now we see a small highlight is visible. Let's add the mobile version of this as well. So let's go back to mobile view, copy this, and it should now be projects highlight underscore mobile.svg, and then just say mobile background highlight decoration. The width is 321, the height is 530, and then we say MD of hidden, otherwise make it visible. Left of half, top of half, everything else remains the same. And now we see that even in a mobile view, we kind of have like a highlight at the back. And that's pretty much it for the project section. Again, we'll be adding the animations in the end, but now we can move on to the automatic scrolling testimonial section. By the way, if you're finding this video helpful, do subscribe for more project-based tutorials in the future, and leave a like to let me know you found this helpful. Let's get started with the testimonials now. So as always, since we have a lot of data, we'll create a data file, so testimonials.json, and then over here we paste in some data. So again, this depends on you if you want to copy paste what I've written over here, or if you want to write down your own testimonials. but each item has an image, which is of the person who gave the testimonial, their name, their role, and then a description of the testimonial. Next, we'll go into the components again, and we'll create another testimonials folder. We'll create a testimonials.tsx and a testimonial.tsx, tsrafce, save, and remove the props. And even in the testimonial, we'll go and do tsrafce. As always, the outermost thing is a section container with ID of testimonials. Then is a div with class name of section-contents. And then is the section header with a plain text of check out these, and then a highlight text of testimonials. And if we go to the bottom, we obviously aren't rendering it. So let's go into sections and render out the testimonials. And now we see it. So below the section header, let's say div, class name w-full overflow x clip. And this is because our testimonials will be quite wide. So we'll be having like 6 testimonials and it'll go outside the page if we try to render it. So we just say if it's overflowing this div, then just don't show it. So it doesn't cause the page to be like very wide. Inside this, create another div, class name width of 1758 pixels, SM width of 2754 pixels. And these values are very precisely calculated because we are basically taking the size of a single testimonial and we're basically setting the div to be as wide as 3 of those. We'll say flex, items stretch, justify start, gap of 23 pixels, PR of 23 pixels, overflow X clip again. And we'll just do that for now. We'll import the testimonials. So import testimonials from @/data/testimonials.json. And then we'll say, now since we want our testimonials to always scroll from left to right, we wanted to wrap around to the first testimonial once the last one reaches the left-hand side. And to be able to do this, we can't just iterate through one instance of our testimonials. We have to iterate through a duplicate of it. So we'll say ..testimonials and ..testimonials. And this is basically taking our testimonials, duplicating it, and then combining them into a single array. We'll do .map, take the testimonial at the current index as well as the ID. And then we will return a testimonial. We'll pass in a key is equal to ID. We'll pass in image is equal to testimonial dot image. Name is equal to testimonial dot name. Role is equal to testimonial dot role, and description is equal to testimonial dot description. And now we'll decide what's rendered at the testimonial. So let's go there. So we'll define the props, image of type string, name of type string, role of type string, and description as well, a string. And then we take out the image, name, role, and description here. So we'll want to render a div, and let's just scroll down. Class name of card flex call gap of 33 pixels, width of 270 pixels. When the width is at least SM, do min width of 436 pixels, px of 33 pixels, py of 27 pixels, and that's it for now. Inside that, we'll render another div, class name of flex gap 2 items center. First is an image from next image. src is equal to image, alt is equal to string interpolation, profile picture for testimonial by name, width is always 38, height is always 38. Below this, div of type flex and class name flex and flex call, p of class name text dash sm, and render the name, and another p of class name text dash sm, but also text dash hash 777, so it's a grayish color, and over here render the role. And then below this last div, we'll add another p, class name text dash xs, sm text dash sm, so that's just the text sizes for different sizes, and then render out the description and save. And now we see that the testimonials are being rendered, and they should be gap dash 2. And yeah, it's being rendered out properly. So now it's just static. We want it to automatically animate from the left to the right. So what we need to do is add a class name for the animation back inside testimonials.tsx. We'll go to this div over here and we'll say animate dash scroll. Now this animate dash scroll class doesn't exist. We need to define it ourselves. So we'll go into the Tailwind config. And then inside the extend object, we'll create a new object called keyframes. And this helps us define animations. So we'll create a new animation called scroll. We'll say at 0% of the animation, we want the transform to be translate x minus 5.2%. And then at 100%, we want the transform to be translate x minus 55.2%. Save that. And then after the keyframes, let's add another field called animation and say scroll. It's an animation where you call the scroll keyframes we just defined. It'll last 25 seconds. It'll be a linear function and it'll be infinite. So it'll always keep repeating. And now we see that the animation is working now. And what it's basically doing is it's taking our list of testimonials. In the beginning, it has a translate x of minus 5.2%, and this was arrived to with trial and error. And once it's at 100% of the animation, which is after 25 seconds, it's basically bringing it to a translate x of minus 55.2. So it's basically moving it back by 50%. And then it'll go back to zero. It'll be back to zero, and it'll be back to minus 5.2%, which means since we had a duplicate of our testimonials list, it's moving back to the original position. So essentially, we originally had 3 testimonials. We're making a copy, so we have 6 testimonials. We're going from the original position to the middle of that 6, and then once that animation is done, it'll go back to the beginning. And that's essentially how this infinite testimonials is working. And let's just see the desktop view to see what it looks like in the desktop view. And we can see even in the wider viewport, it works properly. It's cut off at the ends, and that's exactly what we wanted. So that's about it for the testimonial section. Next up, we'll be working on the experiences section. Okay, so next up we have the work experience section. As you can see, it's just a column of cards, and even in the mobile view, it's a column of cards, but it's a bit narrower. So to get started, as always, we'll add the data first. So in the data folder, we'll create a new file called experiences.json, and then I'll paste in the format. So it's an array with objects, as always, the image of the company you worked at, the company's name, your role at the company, a description of what you did, and the dates that you were present at the company. So next, let's make the components. So in the components folder, let's create an experiences folder and make experiences.tsx and experience.tsx. Let's do tsrafce and save that. Same with experiences, tsrafce, save that. We won't be taking in any props, so delete the props. And then inside sections, let's just add experiences. Let's just import our data first. So import experiences from @/data/experiences.json. Add the section container give it an ID is equal to experiences, or let me check the navbar what it exactly was. It's experience singular. So experience, inside make a div, give it a class name of section dash contents, and let's go back to our portfolio. We'll give it a margin at the bottom of 66 pixels. When it's MD, we'll give it a margin bottom of 43 pixels. And we'll also give it an MX of 64 pixels at MD. Let's add the section header. For plain text, we have a suitcase emoji in my prior, and then for highlight text, we'll add work experience. And there's our new section. Below this, let's make a div, class name of w-full, px of 6, md px of 52 pixels, flex call, and gap of 5. Inside this div, let's map through our experiences, take the experience at each index, get the ID, and then return an experience component. We'll pass in all our props right now. So we'll give it a key of ID. We'll give it an ID of ID, which we'll be using later on. We'll give it an image is equal to experience.image. Company is equal to company experience.company. Role is equal to experience.role. Description is equal to experience.description. And then dates is equal to experience.dates. Now let's add our experience components details. So let's do the props first. We take an ID, which will be a number, as we saw. Image of string, everything's going to be a string. So company, role, string, description, string, and dates, string. And then let's extract all of those. So ID, image, company, role, description, and dates. So on the outermost, we do have a div. We'll say class name. We'll make it a card, flex call, items dash stretch, w dash full, max, w screen lg, px of 6, py of 27 pixels. At md, give it a px of 33 pixels, and give it a gap of 3 in each flex item. Save that. And we see that the cards are being rendered out now. We'll make another div inside this. Class name flex call items dash start, md flex row, gap of 1, md gap of 0, md justify between. So before we put the stuff inside there, let's just add the stuff that's a sibling. So class name text dash sm, md text dash base, and over here we want to render out the description, and we see that's being rendered out. And then below that we want to make another p, text dash sm slash l, md text dash base, and inside that render the dates. And there we have the dates. So inside this div, we want to make another div, give it a class name of flex dash call, md flex dash row, gap of 3, items start, md items dash center. And inside here we'll render our image. So we'll import next slash image, src is equal to image, alt is equal to string interpolation, company image for company. And of course we have to add the width and the height. So width is equal to 18 and height is equal to 18. Let's scroll down again. And then below this we'll add the h3 with the company name. We'll say class name text dash xl font dash medium. And inside here just render the company name. And then below this div we want to say class name text dash base md text xl font medium, and just write down the role that you had. And I think in this case we can still accommodate the title in the same row as the image. So instead of having md for these two, let's make it sm. So right now it's in the same row. When it's narrower it looks cool, and then in desktop mode it looks like this. So that's it for the experience. Again, in the experiences section we do have some background decoration that we can add. So below this div we'll add another div. We'll say class name circle dash icon h14 w14, top of 77 pixels, right of 1.5, md top of 153 pixels, and md right of 90 pixels, and give that a negative z index of 10. Inside here we'll render an image and we have to import that. And by the way, in VS Code, if you write down something, it gives you suggestions. And if you click enter on the suggestion, it auto imports whatever you have suggested, as you can see over here. We'll give it an src of slash bracket underscore icon dot svg. Alt is equal to bracket icon. Width is equal to 23 and height is equal to 23. And if you can't see it right now, but we have the icon rendering in the back. Let's just copy this div. It'll be circle icon, height and width will be same. We'll remove top 77 pixels and we'll say left of 1.5, bottom of 0, MD left of 90 pixels and MD, and we'll remove this MD right, and we'll keep it with a negative Z value of 10 and we'll save that. And we'll change this to electricity and save that. And we see that the bracket icon and the electricity icon are being rendered in the back. So that's it for the work experience section. Last up, we have the contact me section. So the contact section is simple enough. It's just a card at the bottom with text on the left and some buttons on the right hand side. And it's pretty much similar in the mobile view. So let's go ahead and code that out. So inside components, we'll just directly create a contact.tsx component and do tsrafce. Again, this won't take in any props, so we'll delete that. Go into sections and then below experiences put contact, save that. Now we won't be using the section header and section container because it looks slightly different. So we'll just say section tag ID is equal to contact, and then class name is card relative items center mx6 flex call px of 33 pixels, py of 27 pixels, z index of 30, gap of 54 pixels, md gap of 35 pixels, mb of 67 pixels, mb of 42 pixels. Inside here we'll have a div, class name flex call, md flex dash row, gap of 5, md justify between, and md w dash full. Save that. And we see we already have the card being rendered over here. So inside this, we'll firstly create the h2 where it says want me on your team. Let's make it happen. And I'll paste the stars emoji. There we go. Let's add the class name. So font semi-bold, text of 22 pixels, md text of 40 pixels, and md max w of 462 pixels. Save. And that looks a lot closer to the actual design. Below that we have a div, class name of flex call, gap of 5, items center, and md items end. Inside that, firstly we'll have a mail button, so mail to, again this is your email, so johndoe@example.com. Class name is self-center, md self start, bg primary, text white, p-2.5, rounded flex, gap 2.5, items center, text dash lg, md text dash xl divided by l or slash l, and font normal. And inside this we wanted to say let's get in touch. And we'll also render an image. src is equal to slash mail underscore icon dot svg, and alt is equal to mail icon. And we have a mail icon now. Below this a tag we'll have a div, class name of flex dash row, gap dash 1, and this will contain all the social icons. So let's add an a tag. href is equal to https://www.github. Now in your case this would be a link to your GitHub profile. I'm just doing github.com for this. Class name contact dash button, and again this is a custom class name, so we'll go into globals.css, and for .contact dash button we'll say at apply p-1.5 rounded dash md card shadow flex items center justify center w8 h of 8 And now if we go back, we can add an image. So we'll say next/image. We'll say src is equal to slash github underscore logo underscore dark dot svg. Alt is equal to github icon. Height is equal to 16. Width is equal to 17. Class name is equal to hidden and dark block. So we see that over there. For the light version, we'll make another copy of this. And instead of GitHub logo dark, it's just GitHub logo 16, 17, and then it'll just have dark hidden, and by default, it is visible. So that's our first link. Let's just copy this. You could make it into a reusable component, but I'll just copy it. Next will be for Twitter or x.com. So instead of GitHub logo, it'll say Twitter icon. Instead of 16, it'll be 14. Instead of GitHub, it'll just say Twitter, save, and we have that. And let's make a third one. And this will be for Stack Overflow. So stackoverflow.com. Instead of Twitter, let's just say Stack Overflow. It'll still be 14 by 17, but let's just make this capitals and save. And we have Stack Overflow as well. And then after this third div, we'll create a small tag, say copyright ampersand copy semicolon John Doe 2024. Save. And that's our contact section. Let's check it out in the desktop mode. Oh, and my bad. Instead of using the normal apostrophe in this case, we're supposed to use a curly apostrophe. If you can't find that, all you can do is write down ampersand hash 8217 and semicolon, and that should fix that issue over there, and the apostrophe looks a bit different. And let's test this in light mode as well. So we'll go into layout.tsx and remove dark. And we can see even in light mode, it looks good. So that's pretty much the last section in our page, and it's looking good. But the next thing we need to do is add a toggle for our light and dark mode, and then we can get started with the animations. So to create the toggle, we'll first create the component. So we'll say theme toggle.tsx and tsrafe. Again, no props. We'll go into page.tsx, and below the navbar, we'll add the theme toggle. Let's go back to the theme toggle. And this will be containing some logic using useState. So we can just name this as a client component from the get-go. And inside it, we'll have const is dark mode and set is dark mode is equal to use state. It'll be of type Boolean. Let's just specify that using TypeScript. Now this initial value will be based on a few things. So we'll be storing the user's preference of dark or light mode in the local storage. And whenever we load the website, we first want to check the local storage if our preference has been saved. If it hasn't, then just use their preference from their laptop or their PC. So what we can say is local storage dot get item. And again, this is saved in the browser, and we'll be saving this later. If it is equal to dark, then this will be set to true. Is dark mode will be true. So check local storage, and if it's equal to dark, set it to true. Or check window dot match media parentheses prefers color scheme dark dot matches, and set that to true. The second thing, what it does is if the local storage is empty, then get this property from the window of the user. And this property is based on whatever settings you have on your computer, whether you prefer a dark mode or a light mode. So if it matches dark, then it'll return true, and is dark mode will be true again. Now an issue is that this window variable isn't always there when the page is rendering, especially in NextJS, because of server-side rendering. So we'll say type of window not equal to undefined. In this case, do all of these checks. Otherwise, just return true. Now we can add the markup for our toggle. So we'll say it's a button. Let's add the class name. So we'll say fixed top dash 58 pixels, left dash 6, MD top dash 16, MD left auto, MD right dash 42 pixels. And we're just positioning it absolutely right now. Width of 9, H of 18 pixels, BG dash hash 1A, 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 so a custom color. Dark, if it's dark mode, then set the BG equal to hash EF, 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 rounded LG, Z of 50, flex item center, justify end, and dark justify start, and px of 1. So now we see that it's being rendered over there. Let's actually add the stuff inside. So is dark mode. If it is, render an image. If it isn't, also render an image. We'll get to that later. We'll say src is equal to slash sun underscore icon dot svg. Alt is equal to sun icon. Height is equal to 14. Width is equal to 14. Let's just copy this for the case where it is in dark mode. Instead of sun icon, we want to render the moon icon. So moon underscore icon and moon over here. And the width of this will be 19 and save. So now we see that the sun is being rendered, so dark mode should be true, but it's currently light mode, and that's because we haven't connected it to the actual CSS of every page. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say use effect and say document.body.classlist.toggle. Set the dark value is equal to is dark mode. Then check if type of window is not equal to undefined, so the window does exist. Then local storage.set item, the theme value, which is what we were getting before, and if is dark mode, then dark, otherwise light. And this use effect will be based off of is dark mode. Save. And now we see that dark mode is being used. Now let's find a way to change the theme. So const toggle theme is equal to function set is dark mode, take the previous value and set it equal to not previous value. Save. And of course we need to pass it to the on click of this and pass that in. So now we can see that dark mode and light mode are working, and let's switch it to light mode and refresh, and dark mode does not render. So as a fallback, let's add a use effect which gets called whenever the page does load. And let's say const saved theme is equal to type of window not equal to undefined. If it's not undefined, get local storage dot get item theme, otherwise just use dark. If saved theme, and sorry, this should be null. If saved theme, set is dark mode, saved theme is equal to dark. So if it is equal to dark, it'll set it to true, otherwise false. Then else, so there has not been a saved theme, const prefers dark mode is equal to window dot match media, and we'll just copy this over here and say dot matches. And then set is dark mode equal to prefers dark mode. So let's switch to light mode and refresh. And we see that it stays in light mode. Let's switch to dark mode and refresh. And we see it stays in dark mode. So that's about it for the theme toggle. We see we can do light and dark mode on command now. The last thing we need to add is we had a background gradient in the back over here. So let's just add that right now. Over here, let's say image from next image. src is equal to slash bottom underscore gradient underscore mobile.svg. Alt is equal to bottom gradient background. Height is equal to 700. Width is equal to 1024. Class name is equal to absolute bottom 0. Min width 1024 pixels. Min h 700 pixels. Negative z of 50 and md of hidden. Save that. And now we see we have a bottom gradient. Let's do that for desktop mode as well. And this will just be bottom gradient. Height is 936. Width is 1557. Absolute negative bottom of 175 pixels. Left of 1 by 2. Negative translate x 1 by 2. Min width 1557. Min h of 936 pixels. Negative z of 50. Hidden by default. And md block. And if you're wondering how I'm getting the negative 175 pixel value, for example, if I go to the design, I select the desktop dark over here, so the entire frame. I hold down Alt. I can see that the bottom of this gradient is 175 pixels below the frame. So that's why I do negative 175 pixels. So yeah, that's it for the theme toggle, and we're finally ready to get started with some animations. So let's get started with that. So we're finally ready to get started with the animations, and of course the animations aren't there in the Figma, but we'll be adding them ourselves. So the first thing you need to do is you need to install a library called Framer Motion, and it's a library which makes it very easy to add smooth animations to your React or JavaScript project without needing to like mess with a lot of CSS or JavaScript. So you can go into the terminal and write down npm install framer-motion. If you're watching this in the future, this will probably work. But right now I have React 19 and it doesn't work with the current version of Framer Motion. So what I need to do is write down npm install framer-motion, but I also need to do at 12.0.0 dash alpha 0.1 dash dash force. So try out the regular Framer Motion install. If it doesn't work, try out this command and I'll hit enter. So once that's done, let's do npm run dev again. And now we'll be needing to add a lot of animations where a particular element, once it comes into the screen, it animates from a certain direction. So let's make a utility component for that and we can wrap anything we want inside that. So we'll make reveal.tsx. Now out of the bat, it'll need to be use client and let's do tsrafce. The props for this will be react.props with children. Now the props we'll want to take is initial x, which is the initial value, initial x position of our element, which we will be animating in. The initial y position of the element will be animating in. And all of these are optional because we will have default values. The duration of our animation, so number, and the delay in our animation, which will also be a number. Let's take those out here. So we'll take the children in first. Initial x, we'll set that the default to 0, which means there'll be no animation along the x-axis. Initial y will be equal to 0 as well. Duration will be equal to 1 second and delay will be equal to 0. Now all of these are default values. We can modify those when we're calling this. So the next thing we need to do is we need to import motion from Framer Motion. And then we'll delete this div over here and we'll need to make a span and have our children inside it. And to be able to animate the span using Framer Motion, all we need to do is go before the span and write down motion dot. And we'll do this for the ending tag as well. So now it's an animatable span. Now we need to add some logic. So firstly, let's just say initial is equal to hidden because we want to animate the opacity of our div of our span as it animates in. So initially it'll be hidden. For the transition, we'll pass in an object and the delay value will be passed in. And this is basically a shorthand way of saying duration, duration and delay, delay. So these are just settings for our animation. Now let's define two variants of our span. So this is basically saying there are two states of our span and we'll be animating between those two states. So as we said before, we have a hidden state, which is the initial value. And for hidden, we'll say opacity is 0, x is equal to initial x that we get from our props, and y is equal to initial y. And we'll have a second state, which will be visible. Again, you can name these anything. You can name this like tea and coffee or anything you want, but I'll just say initial and visible. When it's visible, we want the opacity to be 1. We want the x to be 0 relative to its original position and y 0. So now we have declared that there are two states, hidden and visible, and the initial state is hidden. Now we need a way to trigger when the animation starts and it goes from hidden to visible. So what we need to do is firstly say const ref is equal to use ref, get that from React, and initial value is null. And we'll say const is in view is equal to use in view, and we get that from Framer Motion. And we'll assign the ref is equal to this motion.span. And if you've never worked with refs before in React, it's basically a way of attaching a variable to a certain tag or component and being able to track it using JavaScript. So we'll say use in view. The first parameter is which element do you want to track, whether it's in view or not. So we'll pass in the ref, which we've attached to the span. And we'll pass in some settings. We'll say once is equal to true, which means only run this animation once and then never again, even if it goes out of view and comes back into view. Then we'll say const controls is equal to use animation from Framer Motion. And we're going to use this to trigger our animation. So let's say use effect if is in view controls dot start and start the animation state from hidden to visible. And this will depend on the is in view variable. And lastly, we need to say that to animate this motion.span, we'll be using controls. So again, we defined a hidden state and a visible state, and we said initially it's hidden. Then we use the use in view hook to track whenever the element with this ref will be in view of the screen. And we said whenever it's in view, start the visible animation. And now we can use this on multiple elements because it's pretty configurable with the initial X and initial Y. So let's just start with the navbar. Let's go into navbar.tsx. And below the button, we have our nav. Let's wrap this with our new reveal component. We'll say initial Y is equal to -20. And the duration of this animation, let's set it to half a second. Now, if we refresh, we can see that the navbar slowly animates in. Let's also add the animations to the sections in the hero section. So let's go into hero.tsx and let's add it to our h1 first. So we'll say reveal and wrap our h1 and we'll say initial x is equal to -25. And you see now it's animating in as we open the page. Let's do it for the p tag here as well. Wrap the p tag and say initial x is equal to -30 and delay of 0.2. So we'll start and we see that it starts after delay and it's more to the left. And lastly, for this button, we'll set the initial x to -40 and delay to 0.4. And now all the elements animate into view. Let's also do it for our images over here. So let's add it here and wrap all three images. And since we didn't pass any initial X and initial Y, it just appears into view after like opacity of 0. So that's it for the reveal animations. We also want to add like a rotation animation to our image over here. So to do that, we'll give the outer div a class name of group, and this doesn't apply any style, but it allows us to track if we hover over this element, and if we hover over this element, we can change the styling of the children elements. So after -z of 10, we'll just say group dash hover, which means if the element with the name group is being hovered, then set the scale to 102%. If group dash hover, rotate -2, ease in out for the animation and duration of 300. Now let's just copy that and go down below and paste this here as well. Instead of negative rotate 2, let's just do a regular rotate 2. And then for this one, we don't want to do any rotation, we just want to scale it by 102. And now we see a neat little animation runs whenever we hover over this image over here. So next up, we'll be adding the highlight effect to the skills section. But before we do, I realized that the cards in the back of the image over here are slightly down below. So to fix that, all you need to do is go to this div, write down relative on that. And on this over here, write down top 0. And in the second card as well, write down top 0 and save. And now you see it's a bit more centered and it looks a lot better. So let's get started with the highlight effect. So let's open skill.tsx. Now we'll be adding animations to this using frame of motion, which only works in client components. So we'll say use client. So now what we want to do is we basically want to add a gradient along the border of each of these, and we want to measure the position of the cursor relative to it. And if it's close enough, we want to show that border on the outside, the highlight border. Otherwise, as it goes further away, it gets dimmer and dimmer. So firstly, let's add that extra border. So let's go above this image and let's say motion.div. Of course, we need to import that first. So import motion from framer-motion. We'll say motion.div. And it won't have any content, but for the class name, we'll say absolute inset 0 border 2. Inset 0 is basically saying it'll be the same size as its parent. Border 2, border purple 500. In the dark case, it'll be border purple 300 and rounded dash LG and save. And now we see that the border is there, but we'll be modifying this based off of the position of the cursor. Now we want to get the cursor's position relative to this div. So we'll be adding a ref and we need to define this ref. So const ref is equal to use ref. It's of type HTML div element, and we'll just give the initial value of null. So now that we have the ref, we need to be able to track the position of our mouse. And to do that, we'll firstly create a use effect, and this will only run once the page loads. And what we're doing is doing window.add event listener, and we listen to the mouse move event, and we'll call the handle mouse move whenever it happens. We haven't defined this yet, so let's just go over here and say const handle mouse move is equal to, it takes an e of mouse event, and we'll just leave it empty for now. But if you have used useEffect before, you will know that if you're adding an event listener in React, you need to remove the event listener once the component gets removed from the DOM. So we'll say return window.remove event listener, and from the mouse move event, remove handle mouse move. And this is just a good practice in React. So the return function of useEffect runs anything once the component is about to be removed from the DOM. Now inside the handle mouse move, what we want to do is firstly say if not ref.current, which means if nothing has been attached to the rev, then just return out of this function because we have nothing useful to do. Otherwise, get const client rect is equal to ref.current.get bounding client rect. And this basically gets the entire box surrounding the current div. So it'll get the box surrounding the Java box over here, for example. Now we need to be able to track the value using frame of motion because frame of motion will be deciding how this border is rendered. So we'll say const x distance is equal to use motion value from frame of motion and set that to 0, and const y distance similarly is equal to use motion value and set that to 0. And we'll say whenever the mouse moves, set x distance, set that to the mouse movements event x minus client rect.x, and similarly y distance dot set e dot y minus client rect.y. And this is basically saying keep track of x distance and y distance inside frame of motion, and whenever the mouse moves, the distance will be updated to the mouse's x position minus the current box's x position. So if I have my cursor here, it'll be 0 of x and y, and as it goes further away, it'll be increasing. So we're able to keep track of x distance and y distance. Now it's all about being able to use that to change the styling of this border. And to do that, we can create a mask. So const mask is equal to use motion template. And this is basically a template of a style that frame of motion can constantly update whenever x distance and y distance update. So we'll say radial dash gradient 100px 100px at x distance px and y distance px, comma 000, comma transparent. And of course we should define these before we use them, so let's put them on top over here. So now that we have the mask decided and it constantly changes this string based on x distance and y distance, let's actually use it. So we'll go to this motion.div and we'll say the style is equal to mask image is equal to mask. And to make sure it works on all browsers, we also say WebKit mask image is equal to mask and save. And now if we go to the skills section, we see that the effect is working as intended. And if we move the cursor, the highlight moves as well. And let's change it to light mode and see if it works. And even in this case, it works properly. So we're done with the skills section animation. So next we'll work on the tilt animation on these project cards over here, but we need to do two things before that. Firstly, for the section header, we want to add a reveal effect as well. So we'll just say reveal, and we'll just say initial x is equal to -40. So if we refresh, we see that the headers animate in, and they only animate in once they come into view. So that's working as expected. We also want these skills to appear in instead of just being there as we start. So we'll go back into skill.tsx and just wrap the div with reveal. Now if we refresh, and let's increase the duration. So we'll increase the duration to be 1.5 seconds. And if we refresh, we see that they slowly animate into view. Okay, so let's do the tilt animation on the projects. So we'll go to project.tsx and we'll firstly wrap them with the reveal animation. So reveal, and we'll set initial x is equal to -50 and delay is equal to 0.5. Now the principle for this is pretty much the same as what we did in the previous part for the skills. So firstly we'll say use client since we will be using frame of motion, and we'll also import motion from frame of motion. Now let's start using it. So we want a const x, which will be the mouse's x position. So we'll say use motion value as we did before and 0. Const y is equal to use motion value and 0. And we want the animation to be a bit springy so that once it's tilted and it goes back to the middle position, it has like a springy effect. And to do that, we can use a hook from frame of motion again, and it's called use spring. Set that to x. Const y spring is equal to use spring y. Now we want to be able to track whenever a mouse enters or exits a card and update the position of the mouse based on that. So const handle mouse move of type mouse event handler on an HTML div element is equal to take an e, which is the event details, and say if e not e dot current target, then just return. So the e dot current target doesn't exist. If it does, say const target is equal to e dot current target as HTML element. So this is typecasting in TypeScript, and it's just needed so that it doesn't throw any errors for the next sections. We'll say const client rect is equal to target dot get bounding client rect, and then we'll calculate the x position. So whenever we have a mouse inside our card, we want the x position in the middle and the y position in the middle to be exactly 0. But as it goes towards the left, it'll be negative 0.5, and to the right will be positive 0.5, and similarly along the y axis. So we'll say const x pos is equal to e dot client x, which means the position of the mouse, because keep in mind on the top left is 0 and 0, and on the bottom right is the full values. That's how JavaScript works. So we'll say e.client x minus client rect dot left. So again, the e.client x is the position of the mouse with relative to the entire window, and client rect dot left is the position of our current card with relative to the window. So this is basically getting the x position of our mouse relative to the current card. And we want to set that as a fraction of our entire card's width. So we'll say client rect dot width. So it'll now be between 0 and 1. And we want that to be between minus 0.5 and 0.5. So we'll just say minus 0.5 and save. We'll do the same thing with the y position. So y pos is equal to client y minus client rect dot top and divide that by the height. And lastly, we'll say x dot set x pos and y dot set y pos. And now we have the handle mouse move function. We'll also create a handle mouse leave function, so const handle mouse leave, and if any time the cursor leaves the card, then we want to say x dot set of 0 and y dot set of 0, because we want it to go back to the original position of being non-tilted. Then for this div, we can say that it's motion.div and do that for the closing tag as well. And then we can say on mouse move is equal to handle mouse move, and on mouse out is equal to handle mouse leave. Save. Now obviously nothing is happening because we want to actually set some styling based off of this x and y position. So on the top, we want to say const x rotation, and we're going to use a hook called use transform from frame of motion. So take the y spring value, and let me just go over this again. So we have a div which has an on mouse out and an on mouse move function attached to it. Whenever it detects a mouse moving on top of it, it calls this function. This function takes the current position of the mouse and the current position of our card and calculates the position of the mouse relative to the card and sets it to these x and y values. These x and y values, when they update the x spring and y spring values because of the use spring hook. And now we're going to use those values to decide the rotation of our card. So we'll be calling use transform, and it basically runs a mathematical function to transform one range to another range. So we have our y spring value, and we know that it can be between minus 0.5 and 0.5. And what we're trying to say is transform this range to either 15 degrees or minus 15 degrees. So we're basically saying if y spring is minus 0.5, x rotation should be 15 degrees. And if it's 0.5, then x rotation should be minus 15 degrees. And then apply a transformation to any other middle value in a linear manner. We'll do the same thing with y rotation. And over here, we should be saying x spring. And it's a bit non-intuitive, but the y spring value should decide the x rotation and vice versa. Now, once that's done, we can go to the motion.div and we can say style is equal to, we'll set transform style and set that to preserve dash 3D. And you'll need this to like make the animation work correctly in the 3D plane. We'll set rotate x is equal to x rotation and rotate y is equal to y rotation. Save. And now we can see that once we hover over our element, it rotates. It is a bit hard to understand which direction is rotating in, and for that, we'll be adding another property. If we go to the image over here, we can add a style, and we can say transform, and that's translate Z 100 pixels. So it's moving the image 100 pixels towards us along the Z axis. So now you can see that it works properly. And there is one issue, and that's because over here it should be -15 to +15 for the Y rotation. And now we can see that everything works correctly and we have a cool tilt animation on our element. And as we can see, the tilt effect works in desktop mode as well, and it works on all of the cards. So next up, we want to be able to stop our testimonials animation when we hover over a certain card, and we want to scale it up. So we'll go to our testimonial.tsx, and for this we'll say hover scale -105, duration 300, and ease in out. And now if we hover over a card, it does increase in size, but it doesn't stop moving our testimonial carousel. And to do that, we need to go into testimonials.tsx. And for this div over here, we just want to say on hover, animation play state is paused. And now we see that if we hover over a certain card, the animation pauses, but it resumes once we stop hovering. So that's taken care of. Let's work on the work experience section. So let's go to experience.tsx, and we'll wrap it with a reveal component, and we'll set the initial X. Now, if you recall, we're taking in the ID as well, which we haven't used yet. And what we're going to say is ID modulo 2. So if it's an even number of experience, like the current experience is at an even index, then initial X is equal to -60. Otherwise, it's 60. So it'll either come from the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And we'll add a delay. So we'll say delay is 0.5 into ID. So it comes in a bit more slowly. Now let's refresh. We can see that they animate in. Let's try scrolling down from the top. So as we scroll down, we can see that they animate in as we move down lower below. Next, let's work on the contact section, which will be our last animation to work on. So let's open up contact.tsx. So firstly, we'll be adding a simple animation for revealing. So reveal, add that. We'll wrap the entire thing, and we'll just say initial Y is equal to 40 and delay of 0.5. And we see that it moves in from the bottom. Now, if you remember, we had a cool highlight effect or a spotlight effect. So let's work on that now. So obviously, since we're adding framer motion, we'll say use client and import motion from framer motion. We'll go down below, and below this small, we'll create a motion.div. We'll say the class name is equal to absolute, W of 64, height of 64, BG gradient radial, from dash violet dash 700 and an opacity of 100. We're basically setting a radial gradient on this div, and we'll say to transparent. We'll set rounded dash full, blur dash 3XL, negative Z of 10, opacity of 0, group hover opacity of 100, and transition duration dash 300. So basically saying have an initial opacity of 0, and once the div named group is hovered on, set the opacity to 100. We're adding a transition between the two, and the duration will be 300. And then just go to the outermost section and just give it a class name of group. Now let's add the logic from framer motion. Again, we're tracking the mouse, so it's pretty similar. Const pause X is equal to use motion value of 0. Const pause Y is equal to use motion value of 0. Const update position, this will be called when we hover, so we'll take an E of mouse event. We'll say if not ref.current, and let's just define the ref as well. So const ref is equal to use ref of type HTML element, set that to null. If not ref.current, return. Otherwise const top comma left is equal to ref.current.get bounding client rect. So we're getting the top and the left value, and we're saying pause X dot set the mouse's X position minus the left position of the card, and pause Y dot set the mouse's Y position minus the top of the card. So that's our function. And let's add an event listener. So use effect, initialize this only once. window.add event listener on mouse move, set it to call update pause, and then of course we have to clear this up once the component dismounts. So we'll say window.remove event listener, mouse move, update pause, save, and we just need to assign the ref. So ref is equal to ref, save. And now we need to go to the bottom, and for the spotlight div which we have made over here, we need to say style is equal to an object, left is pause x, top is pause y, and transform is translate minus 50%, comma 50%. This is just so the center of this div is being used to position it. And one more thing, this gradient radial is not by Tailwind, it's a custom defined thing. So we'll go into tailwind.config.ts, and in the extend, we'll say background image. We'll add a custom background image property. We'll say gradient dash radial. That is a radial dash gradient. Now this is a CSS function, var CSS as well, dash dash tw dash gradient dash stops. This will come from Tailwind. Let's go back. And also this should be minus 50%. And we see the spotlight effect, but we can see it outside the page as well. And to fix this, all we need to do is go to the sections class name and just say overflow hidden and save. And now we see we have a spotlight effect in our contact section, which disappears once we go outside. So those are all the animations that we needed to add to our page. And now the only thing that's left to do is to deploy our website and add a custom domain if you want. So let's get started with that. So to deploy our application, we'll be using Vercel. Vercel is the company which made NextJS, and they make it very easy to deploy your NextJS application. But before we do that, we need to upload all of our code to GitHub. If you haven't used GitHub, it's a good way to back up your code and to create different branches and work with other people while working on a code base. But I'm going to assume you know how Git and GitHub works. So we'll just make a new repository. I'll call this animated dash portfolio-2, and I'll make this private for now, and I will create the repository. Now this will give you some code that you can use to create a new repo locally and push your changes. So just hit the button here and copy the code over here, and all you can do is go into the terminal, paste it in, and it'll automatically push your code to GitHub. So now that your code has been uploaded to GitHub, you need to go to vercel.com and you need to click on start deploying and sign in using your GitHub account. Once you do that, you'll be able to create a new project and it'll list out a bunch of Git repos connected to your GitHub account. I'll click on animated portfolio-2, click on import, and most of the stuff will be automatic now. All you have to do is click the deploy button. One thing we'll do is click on the build and output settings, and we'll toggle the custom install command on. And if you remember, we had to install Framer Motion using the dash dash force directive. And that's because I'm using React 19. In the future, you might not need this, but for now, I'll need to write down npm install dash dash force so that once Vercel gets the code and it's npm installing so that it can build the app, it's able to install Framer Motion correctly. So let's click on deploy and let's hope everything works correctly. So now the project will have been built and you'll probably get a congratulations message like this. I did forget one thing is that once you initialize your repo, you need to commit all of your changes. So all you need to do is write git add dot, and it adds everything, any changes you made, and just say git commit -m initial changes, and just say git push origin main. Now you won't need to redeploy. Vercel will automatically detect that you made changes to your code in your GitHub repo and it will start deploying again. So let's just continue to dashboard, and you can see down below that it's giving the status of building, and that's because we just pushed up some changes right now and it's giving us an error. So we'll go into deployments and click on inspect deployment and we'll see what error we're getting. And all of these are a bunch of ESLint errors, and it's saying this apostrophe does not need to be used and instead you can use these values instead. So let's go into our code, into the contact section and see what it's mentioning. And it's saying the error is in line 46 and we see that we have an apostrophe over here. So let's just delete this. And as I said before, you can use and hash 8217 : that's the one we're using. If you want, you can use any of these values as well. And let's go into hero.tsx as well. And it's saying the same issue. So in line 11, we have this. So we'll replace it with that. And similarly over here, and in 19 and 28 as well. So we'll replace that and go down below and replace that as well. We'll say git add git commit -m fix apostrophe linting and do git push origin main, and now hopefully no error should happen. So we'll go back and just wait for this deployment to finish. So we see that the build has succeeded. Let's click on that. And it gives you a link over here to your deployment. So we can go to animatedportfolio2.vercel.app. Let's open that up. And now we can see that our application has been deployed to Vercel servers and it's working as it was locally. So everything looks great and you can share this URL with anyone you want. You will notice that the URL, it's a bit weird. It contains the Vercel domain and it has just your repo's name as the subdomain. So in the next section, we'll take a look at how you can add your own custom domain and you can change what the link looks like. So the first way you can change your domain is going back into your dashboard. And if you click on your project and go to the settings, in the domains settings, you can edit your actual vercel.app subdomain. So I could name it animated portfolio 2-code complete-2 and save it. And just click on add for that. And now if we visit that domain, you'll see that it has been changed. So you can set this to anything you want. You could set it to your name.vercel.app or your name-resume.vercel.app, but still you have the Vercel domain that you have to use. So to add a custom domain, you'll first need to purchase your own custom domain. And to do that, I'd highly recommend domain.com. I've used it before and it's been a pretty good service and the prices aren't that expensive. They're pretty cheap actually. And if you use the link mentioned down in the description below, you will get a 10% discount on any domain that you purchase. And it really helps the channel as well if you use that link, so do check it out. Anyways, once you're done purchasing your domain, you can go to the domain.com dashboard and in the domains tab, you'll be able to see the domain you purchased. Click onto that one and you can see the settings that you can change. If you come down into the advanced tools section, you can see that you'll have some name servers over here. They won't be the same ones as this, but we'll need to change these so that we can connect domain.com and Vercel. So let's go back into our Vercel dashboard. And in this section, let's just write down the name of the domain that we just purchased. So we'll write down the domain name. I click on add and we'll just go with the recommended route. So we'll just click on add. Now it won't happen for me, but for you, it should recommend the name servers you need to add to your domain provider. And if we go back into domain.com, it'll probably be the same values that we have over here. So all you'll need to do is click on manage. We'll just continue. And you'll need to paste in the first one in the first place and the second one in the second place and click on save. And once that's done, your domain and your Vercel deployment are basically connected. Now it can take up to 24 hours for this change to deploy all over the internet. But once it does, you can visit the URL that you purchased, the custom domain, and you should be able to view your portfolio website over there. And it should work as expected as it was locally. So that's it for the tutorial. If you like this video, this is a reminder to check out Code Complete Labs via the link in the description down below for similar project-based front-end challenges. We're adding new challenges pretty much every week, so do check it out. But as for the tutorial, we learned how to make a responsive website using React and NextJS. We also learned how to add cool styles and animations using Tailwind, and we finally added animations using Framer Motion, such as this cool highlight animation. If you like the video, do remember to leave a like and share the video with fellow developers and comment down below what I should cover next. Oh, and finally, we have a Discord server linked down below. So if you want to have any discussions, if you have any questions, and if you want to check out any cool projects, do join that server down below. But anyways, until next time, thanks for watching.